The bustling airport was alive with the hum of travelers rushing to their gates, announcements echoing through the terminals, and the faint smell of coffee wafting from nearby kiosks. Among the crowd was Alex, a young professional who had worked tirelessly for months to save up enough money to upgrade their usual cramped economy seat to something more luxurious, a first-class ticket. This wasn't just any trip, it was a milestone. For years, Alex had endured long flights squeezed between strangers, knees pressed against the seat in front of them, dreaming of the day they could finally stretch out and enjoy the perks of flying in style. As they approached Gate 23, Alex couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and pride. Clutching their boarding pass tightly, they joined the line forming outside the jet bridge. The first-class passengers were being called to board early, and Alex eagerly stepped forward when their group was announced. They imagined how relaxing this flight would be. Extra legroom, gourmet meals, maybe even a glass of wine to celebrate the small victory of treating themselves after months of hard work. But just as Alex reached the entrance to the plane, a shrill voice cut through the air like a knife. "Excuse me." A tall woman with perfectly styled hair and oversized sunglasses pushed past several people, nearly knocking into Alex. She planted herself right in front of the doorway, blocking Alex's path. Her tone was sharp, commanding attention as she pointed at Alex's boarding pass. "That's my seat," she declared loudly, her voice dripping with entitlement. Alex froze, taken aback by the sudden confrontation. They glanced down at their boarding pass, double-checking the details. Seat 3A, first class, no doubt about it. Confused, Alex looked back up at the woman, whose expression was growing increasingly impatient. Passengers behind them began to murmur, some craning their necks to see what the commotion was about. A few exchanged amused glances, while others sighed, clearly not wanting to deal with drama before takeoff. The flight attendants stationed near the door tried to intervene politely. One of them smiled warmly and said, "Ma'am, please check your boarding pass. Your seat is in economy." But the woman, undeterred, crossed her arms and raised her voice even louder. "I don't care what that paper says. I always fly first class, and there's no way I'm sitting back there with those people," she sneered, gesturing vaguely toward the economy section. Alex felt a knot form in their stomach. This wasn't how they imagined starting their journey. The woman's aggressive demeanor was startling, but what struck Alex most was the sheer audacity of her claim. How could someone demand something that wasn't theirs? Tension filled the air as curious onlookers gathered around, eager to see how this unexpected standoff would unfold. Little did Alex know, this encounter was only the beginning of an unforgettable experience, one that would test their patience, resilience, and ability to stand up for themselves in the face of overwhelming entitlement. The standoff had reached its peak, and the atmosphere in the aisle was electric with tension. Passengers were growing restless, their patience wearing thin as the minutes ticked away. The woman's loud demands and theatrics had turned what should have been a simple boarding process into a chaotic scene that threatened to delay the entire flight. Alex could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on them, some sympathetic, others judgmental, but they remained steadfast, gripping their boarding pass tightly as a reminder of their rightful place. Finally, just when it seemed like the situation might spiral further out of control, a commanding voice cut through the noise. "What's going on here?" The pilot had emerged from the cockpit, his presence immediately commanding respect. He was accompanied by two uniformed security officers, their expressions calm but authoritative. The sight of them sent a ripple of relief through the crowd, though the woman visibly stiffened, her confidence faltering for the first time. The lead flight attendant quickly summarized the situation, explaining that the woman, who refused to board her assigned seat in economy, was causing a disturbance and delaying the flight. The pilot listened intently, his arms crossed as he assessed the scene. Then, without missing a beat, he addressed the woman directly. "Ma'am, we need you to take your assigned seat now," he said firmly. "If you continue disrupting the boarding process, we'll have no choice but to remove you from the flight." For a moment, there was silence. The woman gaped at him, clearly unaccustomed to being spoken to in such a manner. Her face flushed red, and she opened her mouth to protest, but the pilot's stern expression left no room for argument. Even the security officers standing nearby seemed ready to act if necessary. It was clear that this wasn't a negotiation. It was a final warning. Realizing she had pushed too far, the woman hesitated, glancing around at the sea of disapproving faces surrounding her. For the first time since the confrontation began, she seemed to grasp the reality of her situation. With a huff, she grabbed her oversized carry-on bag and stomped down the aisle toward economy class, muttering under her breath about incompetence and unfair treatment. As she passed Alex, she shot them one last venomous glare, though it lacked the intensity of her earlier outbursts. The other passengers erupted into quiet applause as soon as she disappeared into the economy section. Some clapped softly, while others exchanged triumphant smiles. One elderly gentleman leaned over to Alex and said with a wink, "Well done for standing your ground. People like that ruin it for everyone." Alex nodded gratefully, feeling a mix of relief and vindication wash over them. They hadn't asked for this confrontation, but they had handled it with dignity and come out on top. As the rest of the passengers boarded, the mood shifted dramatically. The tension dissipated, replaced by a sense of camaraderie among those who had witnessed the spectacle. Several people complimented Alex on their composure, sharing stories of their own encounters with entitled individuals. A young couple seated nearby joked about starting a support group for victims of screaming Karens, which drew laughter from those within earshot. Once settled into their plush first-class seat, Alex allowed themselves a moment to breathe deeply and reflect. Looking around at the spacious cabin, they felt a renewed appreciation for the luxury they had worked so hard to afford. The ordeal with the woman had tested their patience, but it also reinforced something important. Fairness matters, and standing up for oneself isn't always easy, but it's worth it. Still, as the plane prepared for takeoff, Alex couldn't help but glance occasionally toward the economy section, wondering how the woman was faring. Had she calmed down? Was she regretting her behavior? Or was she still simmering with anger, convinced that the world owed her something? Whatever the case, Alex knew they wouldn't let her actions spoil their trip. This flight was theirs to enjoy, a small reward for months of hard work. And nothing, not even an entitled stranger, could take that away. With a contented sigh, Alex adjusted their seatbelt and glanced out the window at the runway stretching ahead. The engines roared to life, signaling the start of their journey. Despite the rocky beginning, they felt optimistic about the hours ahead. After all, sometimes the best stories are born out of unexpected challenges, and Alex already knew this would be one they'd tell for years to come. As the plane taxied to a stop at the gate, Alex took a moment to gather their thoughts before disembarking. The first-class cabin was quiet now, save for the gentle rustle of passengers collecting their belongings and the occasional polite exchange of thank you as the flight attendants wished everyone a pleasant day. Despite the peaceful atmosphere, Alex's mind kept drifting back to the events of the flight. The chaotic confrontation at boarding, the woman's relentless complaints in economy, and a collective sigh of relief when she finally retreated into silence. Stepping off the plane, Alex felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, there was triumph, a quiet pride in standing up for themselves and refusing to let someone else's sense of entitlement dictate the outcome. On the other hand, there was a lingering sadness, almost pity, for the woman who had spent the entire journey alienating herself from everyone around her. It was hard not to wonder what drove her behavior. Was it insecurity masked as arrogance? A misplaced belief that wealth or status granted her special privileges? Or perhaps something deeper, an inability to cope with situations where she wasn't in control? Walking through the terminal, Alex couldn't help but notice how different the mood felt compared to earlier. Passengers from both first class and economy mingled together now, chatting about their plans, sharing stories, or simply stretching their legs after the long flight. There was an unspoken camaraderie among them, a shared experience that bonded strangers, even if only briefly. Several people approached Alex to comment on the earlier incident, each offering words of support or admiration. "Good for you for not backing down," said an older woman waiting by the baggage carousel. She smiled warmly, her eyes twinkling with amusement. People like that always end up embarrassing themselves in the end. Alex nodded politely, appreciating the gesture. Another man, carrying a guitar case slung over his shoulder, chimed in with a chuckle. "I've been on flights like this before. Always makes me glad I'm not the one causing the drama." His light-hearted remark drew laughter from those nearby, easing any residual tension from the journey. While waiting for their luggage, Alex reflected on the lessons they'd taken away from the experience. For starters, it reinforced the importance of staying calm under pressure. The woman's outbursts might have intimidated someone else, but Alex's refusal to engage emotionally had ultimately diffused the situation. It also highlighted the value of patience, not just with others, but with oneself. Standing your ground isn't always easy, especially when faced with aggressive behavior, but sometimes it's necessary to uphold fairness and respect. More than anything, though, the incident served as a reminder of how small actions can leave lasting impressions. The way we treat others, whether in line at the airport, on a crowded plane, or simply going about our daily lives, shapes how we're perceived and remembered. The entitled woman's behavior would likely be recounted in conversations for weeks, maybe even months, as a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, Alex hoped their composure and grace under fire would inspire others to handle similar situations with dignity. By the time Alex retrieved their suitcase and made their way toward the exit, they felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. The stress of the flight had faded, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. They knew they'd tell this story countless times, to friends, family, coworkers, and each retelling would carry a slightly different tone, humorous, reflective, or perhaps even philosophical. But no matter how they framed it, one thing was certain: it was a story worth sharing. Outside the terminal, the warm sunlight greeted Alex, casting a golden glow over the bustling airport pickup area. As they hailed a rideshare vehicle and settled into the backseat, Alex allowed themselves a small smile. This trip had started with chaos but ended with growth, a reminder that life's challenges often bring unexpected opportunities for learning and self-discovery. Looking out the window as the car pulled away, Alex couldn't help but think about the woman one last time. Wherever she was now, Alex hoped she'd take a moment to reflect on her actions. Maybe, just maybe, she'd realize that true luxury isn't found in a seat assignment or a title. It's in the connections we make and the kindness we extend to those around us. And with that thought, Alex turned their attention forward, ready to embrace whatever adventures lay ahead. The woman, who seemed to embody every stereotype of someone used to getting their way, stood firm in the aisle, her designer sunglasses now perched atop her head. Her piercing gaze locked onto Alex as if daring them to challenge her authority. Passengers waiting to board began to shuffle awkwardly, some whispering behind cupped hands, while others openly stared at the unfolding drama. The air grew thick with tension, and Alex felt all eyes on them, unsure of how to respond. "I don't think you understand," the woman continued, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I always fly first class. Always. There must be some mistake here." She waved her own boarding pass dramatically, though it clearly indicated an economy seat near the back of the plane. Without waiting for a response, she turned to the flight attendant standing nearby, demanding answers. "Why is this person taking my seat? Fix this immediately." The flight attendants exchanged polite but strained smiles, clearly accustomed to handling difficult passengers. One of them stepped forward, speaking calmly yet firmly. "Ma'am, we've checked both boarding passes. This passenger is assigned to seat 3A in first class. Your seat is in row 22, economy class. Please proceed to your designated area so we can continue boarding." Instead of calming down, the woman's frustration only escalated. She threw her arms up in exasperation, her voice rising another octave. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Do you know who I am? Heads turned, and a few snickers rippled through the crowd. It was the kind of over-the-top declaration that sounded more like a line from a movie than real life. But the woman wasn't joking. She genuinely believed her status entitled her to special treatment. Alex, still holding their ground, finally spoke up. I'm sorry, but I paid for this seat. I'm not giving it up because someone else decided they wanted. Their tone was calm but resolute, a stark contrast to the chaos erupting around them. The simplicity of Alex's statement seemed to infuriate the woman even more. Her face flushed red, and she jabbed a finger toward Alex. You? Paid for this? Don't make me laugh. People like you shouldn't even be allowed in first class. Her words stung, but Alex refused to let her provoke them further. Instead, they glanced at the growing audience, noticing the mix of reactions among the other passengers. Some looked sympathetic, nodding in agreement with Alex's stance. Others appeared annoyed by the delay, checking their watches or tapping their feet impatiently. A middle-aged man muttered under his breath, "Just sit where you're supposed to," while a young couple exchanged amused grins, clearly entertained by the spectacle. Meanwhile, the woman launched into a tirade, accusing the airline of incompetence and threatening to file a formal complaint. She pulled out her phone, scrolling furiously, as if searching for someone important to call. "This isn't over," she snapped, glaring at both Alex and the flight attendants. "Mark my words, I'll have this sorted out." Despite her theatrics, the situation showed no signs of resolving itself quickly. The flight attendants remained professional, gently reminding her that blocking the aisle and delaying the boarding process wouldn't help anyone. Passengers began to grow restless, some audibly groaning as the minutes ticked by. Even those who had initially found humor in the confrontation were starting to lose patience. As the standoff dragged on, Alex took a deep breath, trying to remain composed. They couldn't believe what was happening. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about principle. Why should someone else's sense of entitlement dictate whether they got to enjoy the experience they had worked so hard for? Still, Alex knew better than to engage further. Arguing with someone as unreasonable as this woman would only escalate things unnecessarily. Behind the scenes, however, something interesting was happening. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder, almost forming a collective voice of disapproval aimed squarely at the disruptive woman. A few brave souls began voicing their opinions outright. "Lady, just go to your seat already," one man called out, earning nods of agreement from those around him. Another passenger chimed in, "We all paid for our tickets too. No one's getting special treatment." For a brief moment, the woman faltered, glancing nervously at the sea of unimpressed faces surrounding her. But pride, or perhaps sheer stubbornness, kept her rooted in place. Little did she know, her behavior was sealing her fate in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Back home, and settled into their routine, Alex found themselves replaying the events of the flight over and over again. It wasn't just the drama or the absurdity that stuck with them. It was the deeper meaning behind it all. The confrontation with the entitled woman had been more than an inconvenience. It was a lesson wrapped in chaos, a reminder of how people's actions can reveal so much about who they are and what truly matters. Over dinner with friends a few days later, Alex recounted the story, starting from the moment the woman stormed up to claim their seat to the collective eye rolls in economy as her complaints grew louder. Their friends listened intently, laughing at the ridiculousness of it all, but also nodding in agreement when Alex reflected on the broader implications. "You know," one of their friends said thoughtfully, "it's crazy how some people think rules don't apply to them. Like, why does she feel entitled to something that isn't hers?" That question lingered in Alex's mind long after the conversation ended. Why did the woman behave the way she did? Was it insecurity masked as arrogance, a need for control in situations where none existed, or simply a lifetime of privilege that blinded her to basic decency? Whatever the reason, Alex realized that her behavior wasn't just harmful to others. It was self-destructive. By demanding special treatment and refusing to accept reality, she had isolated herself, turning what could have been a pleasant journey into a miserable experience for everyone involved. As the days passed, Alex noticed how the story resonated with others. Coworkers stopped by their desk to share similar tales of entitled passengers, difficult customers, or unreasonable bosses. Each anecdote carried its own brand of frustration, but there was always a thread of humor running through them, a shared understanding that sometimes you just have to shake your head and move on. One colleague summed it up perfectly. People like that are everywhere. You can't change them, but you can decide not to let them ruin your day. Inspired by these conversations, Alex began thinking about ways to turn the negative experience into something positive. They started paying closer attention to their own interactions, whether it was holding the door open for someone, offering a kind word to a stressed-out barista, or simply smiling at a stranger. These small acts of kindness felt empowering, a way to counteract the negativity they'd encountered on the flight. It was a subtle shift, but it made a difference, not just in how Alex viewed the world, but in how the world seemed to respond to them. Still, Alex couldn't help but wonder if the woman had learned anything from the ordeal. Had she reflected on her behavior during the quiet hours after the flight? Did she realize how her actions had alienated her from fellow passengers and embarrassed herself in front of complete strangers? Or had she doubled down, blaming everyone else for the discomfort she'd caused? While Alex doubted they'd ever know for sure, they hoped, at least a little, that the experience might spark some self-awareness in her. In the meantime, Alex decided to focus on gratitude. Flying first class had been a treat, but the real reward came from knowing they'd handled the situation with grace and integrity. It wasn't easy to stand firm in the face of aggression, especially when all eyes were on you, but Alex knew they'd done the right thing. And that knowledge gave them a sense of confidence they hadn't expected, a quiet assurance that they could navigate life's challenges without compromising their values. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Alex stumbled across a meme poking fun at entitled airline passengers. It featured a cartoonish Karen yelling at a flight attendant, captioned with the words, "When you confuse first class with entitled diva." Alex laughed out loud, tagging a few friends in the comments section with a playful note. "This is my life now." The lighthearted post sparked a wave of replies, with people sharing their own hilarious and horrifying travel stories. For the first time since the flight, Alex felt like they could laugh about it, not because it was funny at the time, but because they'd come out stronger on the other side. By the weekend, Alex was ready to start planning their next trip. They pulled up a travel website, browsing destinations and imagining new adventures. When they clicked on the option to upgrade to first class, a smile spread across their face. This time, they wouldn't hesitate to book it. They'd earned it. And no matter what happened along the way, they knew they'd handle it with the same calm determination that had carried them through before. After all, every journey has its bumps, but it's how we respond to them that defines us. As the plane soared smoothly through the sky, Alex finally allowed themselves to relax in the comfort of their first-class seat. The plush cushioning, the extra legroom, and the quiet hum of the cabin were a welcome contrast to the chaos that had unfolded earlier. Yet despite the luxurious surroundings, Alex couldn't help but glance occasionally toward the economy section, wondering how the woman, now relegated to her assigned seat, was handling things. It didn't take long for karma to step in and deliver its own form of justice. Midway through the flight, the peace in the cabin was interrupted by an unmistakable voice rising from the back of the plane. "Excuse me," the woman barked, loud enough for everyone to hear. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle to address whatever new issue had arisen, but it quickly became apparent that this wasn't going to be a simple request. The woman launched into a tirade about everything: the lack of space, the quality of the snacks, the temperature of the cabin. Her complaints echoed through the plane, drawing groans from nearby passengers who had hoped to avoid further drama. Things escalated when a young mother seated across the aisle attempted to calm her crying baby. The infant's soft wails were met with an icy glare from the woman, who leaned forward in her seat and snapped, "Can't you control your child? Some of us are trying to rest." The comment stunned the surrounding passengers, many of whom turned to look at her in disbelief. A few people shook their heads, while others muttered under their breath about how rude and unnecessary the remark was. The mother, visibly embarrassed, but clearly trying to stay composed, simply apologized and continued rocking her baby gently. However, the damage was done. The tension in the economy section grew palpable as murmurs of disapproval rippled through the rows. One passenger, a middle-aged man wearing a baseball cap, leaned over and said loudly enough for others to hear, "If anyone needs controlling, it's you." His words drew nods of agreement from those around him. And soon, several people chimed in with their own criticisms. "You've been complaining since we boarded," another passenger added pointedly. "Maybe if you stopped making a scene, you'd feel better." "Yeah, why don't you switch seats with the baby?" someone else joked, prompting laughter from nearby travelers. Even the flight attendants struggled to hide their amusement as they distributed drinks and snacks, exchanging subtle smiles as they passed by. The woman, realizing she was now surrounded by hostility, seemed to shrink into her seat. For once, she didn't retaliate or escalate the situation further. Instead, she crossed her arms tightly and stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Her earlier bravado had vanished, replaced by an air of discomfort and regret. It was clear that her behavior had alienated her from nearly everyone on board, leaving her isolated and frustrated. Back in first class, Alex observed the ripple effects of the woman's actions with a mix of satisfaction and sympathy. While part of them felt vindicated watching her reap what she had sown, another part couldn't help but wonder if she might learn something from this experience. Was it possible that being confronted with the consequences of her entitlement could spark some self-reflection? Or would she simply blame everyone else for her misfortune? As the flight attendants circulated through the cabin offering refreshments, Alex struck up a conversation with one of them during a quieter moment. "She's really something, isn't she?" Alex said with a wry smile. The attendant chuckled knowingly. "We see all kinds on these flights, but she's definitely one for the books. Don't worry. You're not the first person she's clashed with today, and I doubt you'll be the last." By the time the plane began its descent, the mood in the economy section had shifted dramatically. Passengers openly discussed the woman's antics, sharing stories of similar encounters and bonding over their shared exasperation. Meanwhile, Alex sat back in their seat, reflecting on the journey as a whole. What had started as a stressful confrontation had transformed into a reminder of the importance of patience, humility, and treating others with respect. When the plane finally touched down, and the seatbelt sign dinged off, there was a collective sense of relief among the passengers. As Alex gathered their belongings and prepared to disembark, they noticed the woman hurrying off the plane as quickly as possible, avoiding eye contact with anyone. She looked frazzled and defeated, a far cry from the confident figure who had stormed onto the plane hours earlier. Walking down the jet bridge, Alex felt a renewed sense of gratitude, not just for their first-class upgrade, but for the lessons learned along the way. Sometimes, the most memorable experiences aren't the ones we plan for, but the ones that challenge you. The tension in the aisle was palpable, and the woman's refusal to budge turned what should have been a routine boarding process into a full-blown spectacle. Passengers who had initially been amused by the confrontation were now growing visibly irritated. The line behind Alex stretched further down the jet bridge, with people shifting their weight from foot to foot and sighing audibly. A toddler started whining, tugging at his mother's sleeve as she tried to soothe him while keeping an eye on the drama unfolding before them. The flight attendants, though trained to handle difficult situations, looked increasingly flustered. One of them stepped closer to the woman, speaking in a tone that was calm but firm. "Ma'am, we need you to move so we can continue boarding. If there's an issue with your seat assignment, we'll address it once everyone is seated." But the woman wasn't having it. She crossed her arms tightly across her chest, her posture rigid with defiance. "This isn't fair. she exclaimed, her voice carrying far beyond the immediate group. "I deserve better than this. You're treating me like some commoner." Her choice of words drew stifled laughter from a few passengers, though most simply rolled their eyes. Someone muttered loudly enough for others to hear, "We're all commoners here, sweetheart." Alex stood quietly, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. They had never encountered anyone quite like this woman, someone who seemed genuinely convinced that the rules didn't apply to her. Every time she spoke, her tone grew shriller, her gestures more exaggerated. At one point, she whipped out her phone, holding it up as if recording the interaction. "This is unacceptable," she declared, pointing it toward the flight attendants. "I'm documenting everything. My lawyer will hear about this." Her threat fell flat. Rather than intimidating anyone, it only fueled the growing resentment among the crowd. Several passengers exchanged knowing glances, silently agreeing that this woman was making things worse for herself and for everyone else. A businessman in a crisp suit leaned over to the person next to him and whispered, "If I miss my connection because of this, I'm filing a complaint too." His comment earned a chuckle from those nearby. Meanwhile, Alex felt torn between standing their ground and avoiding further escalation. On one hand, they knew they were in the right. They had purchased their ticket fairly and followed all the rules. On the other hand, the thought of prolonging the argument was exhausting. Still, something inside Alex refused to back down. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about not letting someone else's sense of entitlement override basic fairness. As the minutes dragged on, the woman's behavior became increasingly erratic. She began pacing back and forth in the narrow aisle, muttering under her breath about incompetence and injustice. Occasionally, she shot daggers at Alex, as if blaming them personally for ruining her day. When another passenger politely suggested she take her assigned seat to avoid delaying the flight, she rounded on them with startling ferocity. "Stay out of this. This has nothing to do with you." Her outburst silenced the murmurs momentarily, but it also hardened the resolve of those around her. What had started as mild annoyance transformed into outright disapproval. Even the flight attendants, who had remained unfailingly polite until now, began exchanging subtle nods, a silent signal that they'd reached their limit. One of them discreetly radioed the gate agent, likely requesting additional assistance. Despite the mounting pressure, the woman showed no signs of relenting. Instead, she doubled down, insisting that the airline rectify the mistake immediately. Her demands grew more unreasonable by the second. Upgraded accommodations, compensation for the inconvenience, even a personal apology from the captain. Each new request elicited groans or sarcastic remarks from the surrounding passengers. At this point, Alex realized something important. The longer the standoff continued, the more isolated the woman became. With every loud declaration and accusatory glare, she alienated herself further from the very people whose sympathy she sought. It was almost poetic justice. Her own actions were ensuring that no one would side with her, no matter how justified she believed her complaints to be. And yet, despite the absurdity of the situation, Alex couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy. Was this woman truly unaware of how entitled she sounded, or was she simply too proud to admit she was wrong? Either way, it was clear that the resolution wouldn't come easily. As the minutes ticked by and tempers flared higher, Alex braced themselves for what might happen next. Whatever the outcome, one thing was certain: this encounter would leave a lasting impression, not just on Alex, but on everyone involved. The memory of the flight lingered with Alex for weeks, not because it was traumatic, but because it had taught them something valuable about human nature and about themselves. It wasn't just a story to recount at dinner parties or a funny anecdote to share with friends. It was a reminder of the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it feels uncomfortable. Life, Alex realized, was full of moments like these, small tests of character that could either bring out the best or reveal hidden weaknesses. One evening, while sitting on their couch with a cup of tea, Alex opened their laptop to book another trip. This time, they didn't hesitate to select first class again. They scrolled through the options confidently, imagining the comfort of extra legroom and gourmet meals. But as they clicked confirm, the thought struck them. This seat wasn't just a reward for hard work, it was also a symbol of resilience. The last journey may have started rocky, but it ended with clarity and growth. Whatever happened next, Alex knew they were ready. When the day of the new flight arrived, Alex approached the airport with a mix of excitement and curiosity. Would this trip be smooth and uneventful, or would there be another test waiting around the corner? Either way, they felt prepared. As they boarded the plane and settled into their plush seat, a familiar voice broke the calm. "Excuse me, is this your seat?" A man in a business suit gestured toward Alex's boarding pass, his tone polite but cautious. Alex froze for a split second, memories of the previous flight flooding back. But then they looked closer at the man's face. He wasn't confrontational or demanding. He seemed genuinely unsure if he'd misunderstood his own ticket. With a smile, Alex reassured him, pointing out the seat numbers clearly marked on both their passes. The man chuckled nervously. "Ah, my mistake. Thanks for clearing that up." And just like that, the moment passed without incident. Sitting back in their seat, Alex reflected on the difference between the two encounters. One had been fueled by entitlement and aggression, while the other was resolved with kindness and understanding. It was a stark reminder that people aren't all the same, and neither are conflicts. Some challenges require firmness and resolve, while others call for empathy and patience. Knowing which approach to take made all the difference. As the plane soared above the clouds, Alex took out a notebook and began jotting down thoughts about the lessons they'd learned. First, they wrote about fairness. Not everyone gets what they want, and that's okay. Rules exist for a reason, and bending them for one person undermines the system for everyone else. Second, they noted the value of staying calm under pressure. Reacting emotionally only escalates tension, whereas composure can diffuse even the most volatile situations. Finally, they emphasized the power of perspective. Every challenge is an opportunity to grow, whether it's learning to stand your ground or recognizing when to let go. By the time the plane landed, Alex felt lighter, as though they'd processed the entire experience fully. Stepping off the aircraft, they noticed how different the atmosphere felt compared to their last arrival. There were no angry glares, no lingering tension, just travelers going about their day, some laughing, others rushing to make connections. It was a refreshing change, a sign that not every journey has to involve drama. In the weeks that followed, Alex found themselves sharing their story more often than they expected. Friends, family, coworkers, all wanted to hear about the infamous Karen and her meltdown. Each retelling brought fresh insights, turning the incident into a kind of parable about humility, fairness, and self-awareness. Some listeners laughed at the absurdity of it all, while others nodded seriously, saying things like, "Wow, good for you for handling that so well." But perhaps the most rewarding part came later, when someone told Alex that their story had inspired them. A coworker confessed that they'd recently faced a similar situation, with a difficult customer who refused to follow guidelines, and hearing Alex's account gave them the courage to stay calm and assertive. "I kept thinking, if Alex can do it, so can I," the coworker said with a grin. That moment stayed with Alex long after the conversation ended, a testament to the ripple effect of standing up for oneself. Looking ahead, Alex knew life would continue throwing curveballs, some predictable, others completely unexpected. But they also knew they'd face each one with the same blend of strength and grace that had carried them through before. The entitled woman on that fateful flight might never understand the impact of her actions, but Alex did. Her behavior had been a mirror, reflecting not only her flaws, but also Alex's ability to rise above them.